smile, and action. All right, welcome back to the Shelf Storytellers. So today we are diving into the science behind book launches, and we have a very special guest with us, Linda Radke of StoryMonsters. Linda is a trailblazer in kidlit and has helped countless authors get their stories into the hands of young readers.
Linda, thank you so much for joining us today. And to kick things off, could you share a little bit about yourself, your journey, and how you became a key figure in the world of children's literature?
I'd be happy to give you information. My background goes way back to my teaching days. I'm a former teacher. My degree is in special education, pre-K through 12th grade. And I think once a teacher, always a teacher. And that even though it's been years since I've been in an actual classroom, I feel like I have remained in a virtual classroom forever because I'm always thinking back to what we can do for kids and make it easier to educate them. I started producing, promoting, and marketing books in 1985. And I started actually with my own books. I tried to hire a publicist to help me market and promote it. And she says, Linda, we would love to help you. We'd love to take your money, but we don't know how to market books. Well, keep in mind, this was back in 1985. And so I thought, okay, what have I done? I've created, in this case, it was a domestic screening kit for hiring household help because I had a household employment agency. And I thought, I've got this great kit. Now, how am I going to let the world know about it? So I did my homework. I did my research. And there was a lot of trial and error. Along the way, I thought to myself, if I wasn't sure what to do, I bet there are other authors out there who are experiencing the same thing. So I started off by offering, do you need a book flyer created? Do you need a postcard created? And all of a sudden they says, Linda, could you also help us with a media kit? Could you help us with a website? Knowing me, I figured I'll find a way and I'll find the team to support what needs to be done. And that was the beginning of it. And so after I started doing my own marketing and promotion, my company name was 5-Star Publications. The marketing division was Publisher Support Services. So it kept growing and growing. And then all of a sudden they said, Linda, will you help us publish our book? I thought, well, I did mine. I said, sure. And so the rest is truly history. I went on to partnership publishing. I went on to some traditional publishing. And whether it was just editing or proofreading or graphic design, you name it. If it needs with promoting or marketing a book, my company was the place to contact. For over 25 years through 5-Star Publications, I did all different types of books. I worked with individuals unknown. I worked with celebrities. You name it, I was involved with it. And you know what? I treated each and every author as if they were my only author. Even to this day, they'd come back and say, Belinda, it sounds like I'm your only author. I says, well, that's my intention. But what they didn't know, they were far from my only author. Something new that I'm starting to do. I don't know. My mind of marketing is just, I have people contact me all the time that need help with launching their book. And I try to find solutions. And I try to find economical solutions if possible. You know, I had 2 authors that did not have a website. And I thought, if you're going to hire us to help you launch your book, to help market it, to get promoted in StoryMonsters Inc., INK magazine, then even though you don't have a website, we can create a landing page for you. Because if you're going to put good money after all your hard efforts and you want to get word out, but they don't have a place to land to connect with you. So we recently created a landing page for 2 different authors. One happened to be published through StoryMonsters, LLC, StoryMonsters Press, but the other was not. And while her publisher had information on their website, there wasn't anything to really give her a big splash. So one of the things I encourage you to do, if not hiring StoryMonsters LLC, find someone to help you create. If you can't afford to do a full website, when you're getting ready to launch your book, have a landing page and let it grow from there.
Linda, that is a perfect segue into our next question, which is, we're all thinking the same thing. launching a book today really feels like you're blending an art with strategy. So in your experience, besides a website and a landing page, what are the critical steps that authors in Kidlit should take before the book is even published?
I think they need to start thinking about publicity before they write their book. You need to think about your audience and how are you going to reach your audience and age level. I have people who have contacted me. One of my first questions, what age level? Oh, my book is for everyone, Linda. Like from 3 years old to 80 years old. I says, wait a minute. You're trying to market your book to a classroom teacher, and it happens to be a second grade or third grade classroom teacher, then the writing needs to be focused on that age range. And if your book is geared for the younger ones, you want vibrant illustrations. But if your book is more like a chapter book, and that's wonderful, then let's go for a middle age. But if you try to market and promote a fully illustrated book, generally speaking, to middle grade on up, they're going to think you're treating them like a little baby. Okay? So put yourself in their shoes. And if you're not able to, then borrow a kid or two, borrow a classroom, and find out what they want and what appeals to them. Bottom line is you have a purpose for what you're doing, but let's make sure that purpose coincides with their needs and their wants. And I will give you an example. Many years ago, so many people try to get their books in the hands of a traditional publisher, and you need to pitch them, not me. Okay. But with that said, years and years ago, I had published a book written by a young author. To this day, I still distribute it. But I submitted it to Scholastic. This was probably well over 30 years ago. And the vice president of Scholastic at that time wrote me a personal letter. I was just like, wow, this doesn't get any better. But this is what he said to me. He says, Linda, I think your book is great. I think you did a great job publishing it. But I want you to think of the mindset of a kid with $10 in his pocket. His parents or guardians gave him a $10 budget. They said, do you think a kid with $10, and he wasn't being offensive to me at all, is going to buy that book? And if not, what kind of book would that middle grade student or whatever age student want to buy? And that changed my whole mindset. And I think some of the things you really need to think about when you're thinking about pre-publicity and pre-marketing, once again, what does your audience want? It might be your passion, but it might not be theirs. And that goes on to another idea. If you're an unknown author, what do? How do you get respected? Yeah. You find those who are respected, those who are well known, and you try to get a review. I was so blessed when Betty White, God rest her soul, she endorsed 2 different books I happened to be involved in publishing that had to do with animals. Okay, that leads me to quality. I am very fortunate to have a phenomenal team surrounding me. The key to success, in my opinion, is having a phenomenal team. And I am blessed that not only do they do work for me, but several do work for Disney. And the reality is that's the type of industry you want to work your way into that you're competing with. And if you're not able to, then you need to rethink it. So getting back to endorsements, when I published a book called TikTok, and it was about living with Tourette syndrome, and it was written at that time by a 3rd grader and illustrated by a 5th grader, I was working with the 3rd grader's mother, and I says, okay, Dylan Peters, he's in 3rd grade, he's a new author. What can you do to get visibility? Well, let's see if we can find someone who's involved with the Tourette Syndrome Foundation or organization. That we did. And he lived in, if I'm saying this right, Olathe, Kansas, and a former Major League Baseball player who not only had Tourette syndrome, but he started a foundation. So I said to the mom, why don't you try to have Dylan connect with him through your efforts? But I don't want you writing the letter and asking for a possible review or an endorsement. It needs to come from the voice of an 8 or 9-year-old. Think about that. Are you going to say no to an 8 or 9? And then one other idea with that same book, the same author, That was back when Oprah was on all the time. So I happened to hear Oprah talking with a teacher who had Tourette syndrome, and he wrote a book about it. I could barely wait until morning. I contacted the author's mother. I says, okay, now young Dylan needs to connect with this gentleman who was just on Oprah talking about Tourette syndrome. Let's see if Dylan could ask him to review his book and maybe even write a nice endorsement, and only if he likes it. Not only did he get back to Dylan, and not only did he provide a fabulous endorsement, now I take it to the next level. Level 1 is develop a relationship. The relationship was developed. Number 2, ask him if he would consider writing classroom tips for teachers when working with children with different needs. Because now I'm taking an unknown author, connecting him with not only a known author, but an author who was just recently on Oprah. He promised to do it, and that he did. So it's taking steps and developing relationships. And now I want to go back to one thing about Jim Eisenreich, the former Major Baseball player who started his own Tourette Syndrome Foundation. Jim was so gracious, great review. So here I am again thinking marketing. And I says, Dylan, I like to have book trailers created. And I said, Dylan, what if you ask him to be part of your book trailer? And of course, with the help of his mom, you notice I'm saying everything, parent permission. Jim agreed to do it. Not only did he agree to do it, but he didn't charge us, being the publisher. You talk about a person with a kind and giving heart. So, okay, now my mind is going. I'm in Arizona. Dylan was in the Olathe, Kansas area. I'm going to be producing a book trailer, but I'm here and they're there. What do? I find a videographer in that area. And then everything was set up. We're getting ready to film it. And you need to have a script. You just don't wing this. So I had a script. It was approved. And it was set up to be filmed in some type of warehouse. The night before the filming, I says, wait a minute. This book is about Dylan Peters, who has Tourette syndrome. His whole book is about taking his courage and his mother to school with him to tell his classmates. So the night before the filming, I thought, wait a minute. This took place in a classroom. This didn't take place in a warehouse. So I contacted the mom and I says, let's see if we can get a school involved and have this filmed in the classroom. The mother contacted the principal at Dylan's school. He volunteered a classroom at their school. So then I thought, how do I want this story to end, this book trailer? The book wasn't out yet, but the opportunity was there. So I had a mock book created. So you saw the cover of the book. They were opening it up, blank pages, but I needed it then. So I says, okay, you have to understand. Dylan was 9 years old. He was wearing, I believe, braces. And he had the sweetest sounding voice. And I told his mom, we need to capture that youth because as Dylan gets older, that sound of that youth is going to be lost. She agreed. So I said, I know how I want this video to end. I want it to end with Jim saying, with a baseball and mitt in hand, saying to Dylan, let's go out and throw some balls or whatever and that's how it ended. Because it pulled in baseball. Jim couldn't say enough good things about the book. And that video is still used to help promote his book. And the reason I'm sharing this with you, when you talk about writing a book, you need to think about all these things and you need to think, what are ways I can promote it? What are ways that you and you and you and you and everybody out there is going to want to learn more about?
I completely agree. And I love this story. The story is amazing. This is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing this. How should authors prioritize their efforts in preparing for the launch, especially with a limited budget?
Mm-hmm. Have a media kit done, a professional media kit. When we do media kits and there's samples on our website, you need to have a one-page news release. Do not overdo that news release. They don't want to read a book. You want to entice them. you need to have descriptions. And I'll tell you why. 15, 25, 50, 100-word descriptions. There are going to be times where you needed a description and they don't want a book again. If they ask you for a 15-word description and you send them 100 words, guess who's going to chop those words and guess who's going to choose what to chop? They are. Have control over that. You want to have media questions, a dozen questions that media members are comfortable asking you. There are times when I have set up media interviews and a member, let's say it's a radio interview, and I have come to the rescue of media many times over the years. And they say, Linda, I don't have time to get a book. Now, of course, there's a PDF file. I send them a media kit. I send them 12 questions that they could feel comfortable asking that appears that they've read the book and they love it. And oftentimes, you can't guarantee they're going to ask that, okay? If you have a limited budget, go again, look on the samples on our website. But you know what? If you have a little bit of money to spend, hire someone who's great at marketing materials. It could be the best investment you ever make. That's one of the key things. It's okay to cut certain corners, but cutting the wrong corners could cost you sales, distribution. It could cost you everything you've worked so hard. I will also say two things. I can never say just one thing.
We like more. Two is great.
Hey, more is better, you know?
I want you to have a dynamic title for your book. And I want to talk a little bit about that before I go into the second item. If the title of your book doesn't tell your audience what it's about, then your subtitle better. And if you can add a title that lends itself to being the name of a website or a URL that forwards to your website. Example, a book that I wrote probably 35 years ago. Nannies, Maids, and More, the economical guide to hiring household help, or if the dog likes you, you're hired. Now, I know that's a long, long title, but if it works, I owned a household employment agency for 5 years, and I interviewed and I helped people find and hire household help. I did a book on the whole subject matter. And guess what? If they didn't know who Linda Foster Radke was, okay, and they needed a nanny or a housekeeper or senior care, those were theirs, even way back then. Those were the key search words, and they found me. So I suggest having a shorter title. And I have people come to me and they want me to help market their book. And they have the most sentimental title. And I said, what is your book about? And then they tell me. I says, that's fantastic, but no one else in the world is going to know it. So we come up with a subtitle. And if I don't come up with it, my team member does. Okay. So you need to be thinking these things before you publish your book, before you launch it. And that's going to lead me to cover design. I'm going to tell you something. The hardest part of my job is telling someone after all that work they put into their book, after all the money they spent, and even though they may not have spent as much as I would have charged, they spent a lot of money. And I have to be the one to tell them that their artwork doesn't cut it. I had a physician, a doctor contacted me who started a medical school. And he contacted me. This is when offering partnership publishing. And this is when I get all different types of books. And he says, Linda, I need your help. He wanted us to help publish the book. Well, let me look at your manuscript. And I said, Doctor, this is hard for me to say to you, but your book has over 800 pages. You'd need an editor. And he says, Linda, I had a professional editor. Then I'm going to tell you something in defense of your professional editor. He was doing what you wanted him to do, not what needed to be done. So I says, the first thing we're going to do is have it evaluated, and I'm going to charge you a professional fee for that. Then we're going to come back and see if you agree or not. And I says, you're going to know what we're made of by our evaluation. So the evaluation was done, and he goes, Linda, I think he pretty much agreed with everything our editor had to say. Well, I think we ended up taking an 800 and some page manuscript to maybe 450 pages. Listen to professional advice. That's another tip. The other thing is, again, You've got to have a marketable title, something fun, okay? Something that makes you want to open the book yourself and look through it, even if you're not a 7-year-old, okay? But maybe you have a 7-year-old. So make sure you have a dynamic cover. And the hardest thing, again, for me is to tell someone those characters are sweet, but are you going to sweep them off their feet? And if not, keep searching. You'll find that person, but don't stop. Don't stop until you get it right. That's the best advice I could ever get. I have to finish one little itty bitty thing about the doctor I worked with. When I told him I was afraid to tell him what he might not want to hear, but he needed to hear before he hired me, he says, Linda, I'm a doctor. And before starting the medical school, I had my own practice. And he goes, I had to be the giver of bad news to people all the time. He goes, Linda, I can take it. I want to go back to saying, be prepared to take it and learn from it. Okay. It's not meant to hurt your ego or your feelings. It's about trying to give you the best possible book. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, you really mentioned all of the traps that people tend to fall into. Everything from the title advice to going with art that you might like that might not be for your audience. And then having editors work for you versus, again, the market and the audience. So how does a successful book launch differ between picture books and middle grade novels? Are there any key strategies besides the ones that you've mentioned that might work better for middle grade versus picture book?
I think there's a key thing. The answer is yes, I do have ideas. I think it's important to be prepared on two different levels when you're invited to do a book talk or a book event, and be prepared. I think it's important to think about a plan and not just think about it. And this is for marketing purposes. On your website, I want you to have a sheet of what you will talk about, okay? And what you'll talk about for maybe it's 1st through 3rd grade, maybe it's 4th through 6th grade. You need to have a plan. And you need to think about, and it goes back to what does a 10-year-old, what does a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, $10 to spend want to buy? You need to think about what they want to hear. Get them involved. I'm going to give you an example of a fun idea that was not mine. It was the author's idea. She contacted me several months ago, and she goes, Linda, I was not able to make a big event you had for your Story Monster greenie boxes at a local Barnes & Noble store. And we had a lot of authors involved. She goes, Linda, I want to hire you to do an event at Barnes & Noble. I want to hire Story Monster to be there. And there were children of all different ages. I mean, it was magnificent. But I think the key thing is to be prepared for the unexpected.
Well, this is awesome. And it's so important to be prepared. For me, sometimes marketing can feel daunting, especially as an author. So what channels would you suggest or tools to use that I know you've touched a little bit on it, but to being effective for children's books? I know you mentioned the greenie boxes and things like that, but what would you suggest?
Yes, and I will pull in the example of what that author suggested for her event at Barnes & Noble that I promoted. Is tied in beautifully with her book. We talked about setting up a treasure hunt. So, and that could be applied to anyone's book. Here's what we did with this treasure hunt at a Barnes & Noble store. To go along with the theme of her book, she created these giant, and her book had to do with diamonds and water. So she had these giant, I think it was like diamonds. And I says, okay, sometimes you got to wing it with these ideas. We were there early with Story Monster. So we were placing these diamond kind of prints throughout the store. But I had a method behind my madness. I says, I want to take a copy of your book and I'm going to put it in the children's area for middle school. Then I'm going to take it to another side of the store where there's another area. And what we're going to do is Story Monster's going to get up and he's going to go with the children, and I'll help to encourage them where to look. And if they found where the author's book was located, they were going to get this really fun prize. You know what? You bring a sense of fun to wherever you go. They're not going to forget you. They're not going to forget your book. And you could utilize, and I'm going to use STEAM or STEM, You could utilize math. You can utilize art. You could maybe have them write a poem. Maybe you could have them doing their own adventure and turning it into a book. And another thing for you both to think about as authors is that, you know what? When you offer to attend as a speaker, depending on the age range, I would encourage you to have a segment where you talk about becoming an author. Oh, you're in third grade. Oh, I know a publisher that published a third grader's book. Well, it's been a few years, but then you do your homework and you find publishers. And then all of a sudden, then you could have math. Then you could have business built into it. Oh, so you want to know what's involved in being a publisher? Oh, I can tell you what's involved for self-publishing. Okay, we're going to talk business now, just between the two of us, okay? And then all of a sudden, now you're going to think about marketing this wonderful book. Say, I have to think about marketing, just like I'm hoping your teacher will buy a book. You're going to be hoping that somebody buys your book. And then you could have a whole lesson plan of creating a self-publishing company. And then you could have another lesson plan for marketing. And then you can contact, and it doesn't have to be Barnes and Nobles. They have a special place in my heart, okay? But there are independent bookstores that are also dynamic. You can talk to them and say, I want to do a fundraiser because the class has created a book. We have a division called School Express Press where kids can do their own books, but now help them sell it. You are going to become a hero to them because what are you doing? You're an author. And I'm going to tell you something. They are going to worship the ground you walk on when you tell them that you're an author. I mean, you're going to have stories to share, okay? And so I think it's important. Ask not what your publisher can do for you, but what you can do for your publisher, okay? Which leads me to something else. Somebody recently contacted me because they knew a friend, or an associate, I should say. The first thing she mentioned to me was she hadn't joined the Society of Children Writers and Illustrators yet because she wasn't ready to spend that money. I says, that told me a lot about you. You'll find. And you know what? If there's an organization that can support what you're doing, you don't wait until you have a book in your hand, okay? But the point is, I said, the other thing is, what are you going to do to market and promote your book? She was hoping to sell me on the idea. She goes, no, that's for the publisher to do. This is a recent conversation. You need to know this. And I says, wait a minute. We need to talk. I says, you're coming to me and you're telling me that if I want to consider publishing your book, that I'm going to have to do it all. Guess what? And I says, I'm going to tell you something else. When you start to look for a publisher, she just wanted to pick my brain. So that was fine. No, I do it all the time. Okay. That's not an issue. But when she said, no, that's the publisher's job. And that's when I came up. That's when I said, ask not what your publisher can do for you, but what you can do for your publisher. And if you're looking for a publisher or a literary agent, here's another tip. Write a list of things that you are willing to do to help market and promote your book. And not just when it gets published. I want them to see a plan that says, this is what I'll do the second year. But the point is this, is that think about what you'll do for your publisher, because you know what? They have, as we all know, hundreds, if not thousands of authors to consider. But if a new author happens to land in front of them or their manuscript on their desk, that is going to be the difference of maybe saying yes or no to being offered a publishing contract.
It's amazing. Like, there's so much that goes into getting a book published, getting it launched. Do you think that it's also based on timing?
When I say make it timeable, if you come to me today and you say, I am working on a book that deals with bullying, or I'll relate it to a book that I've recently published, The Great Animal Escape. Let's see what we can find about animals that's coming up soon. Another thing, always think about contributing and donating book proceeds to an organization that could connect with the topic. So if you happen to be writing a book about animals, think about connecting with animal rescue shelters. Because to me, and that's what I'm doing, okay? Develop a relationship. And you know what? I want to develop relationships with animal shelters so kids of all ages, and I won't just say kids, but the kids in us of all ages will want to read our book to these shelter animals and then take pictures and hashtag StoryMonsters or hashtag whatever the author's name is. But in everything you do, let it be connected with goodness. You follow me? And sometimes it doesn't mean making any money, but that's something to consider. Timing. Look for, this is National Animal Day. This is National Wizard Day. This is National Dragon Day. It will happen if you think it and you see it, okay? Let's say that you're looking for a dragon specialist. You think I'm kidding, but I'm not. They're out there, okay? I know this. I know it without knowing it. You find that dragon specialist, and you come back and tell me. You find a dragon specialist and you ask him to review your book, and you'll give him a plug. You say, I'm going to be doing this event. I'm going to be contributing books, or I'm going to be contributing books to the StoryMonsters Greenie boxes. And I would really like to see your name on my book because you're doing great things. And do you know that I am contributing a certain amount of proceeds to the National Save the Whatever Foundation? Not if, I don't like the word if, when you connect with someone that has a well-known organization and the topic connects with the book, you need to find a connection, not just, okay, I'm just going to ask this person to endorse the book. Then you say, this is what I do. I would say, I would very much like to contribute a percentage of proceeds to your fabulous organization, but I want to know if I have your permission to use your logo. Lesson number 1, never, ever, ever use somebody's name or logo without written permission, okay? And say, but I want to do this. Do I have your permission? And sometimes it takes months for that trail to land on getting permission, and it will be worth it, okay? But I think that timing, you'll find events that you just look up a keyword under National Month of, National Day of, and guess what? If you can't find one, you suggest one.
You've managed to give us some very important legal advice and marketing tips all at once that no one should neglect. Well, wait. It's not legal advice. It's simply advice that we should, right? We'll say it like that. Simply advice. Please look into it. Consult your lawyer. So, Linda, we have seen that StoryMonsters has created incredible community. How can authors build their own communities of readers, educators, supporters, partners, etc. to help a book launch?
I think by having character identity. When I first started publishing books, it's important to have a character that people can relate to, that they could fall in love with. And that is universal in appeal. And I know I'm giving away my trade secrets, but it's all for the good, okay? With every book that I publish, children's book, I would have a curriculum guide done, and I would create a puppet. And one of the first puppets I created, I did with the theme of the book, and it was for that book. And then when I published a book by Conrad Stark, Rattlesnake Rules, I had a rattlesnake created that people thought it was stuffed animal was so real that when we did events at Costco, at the zoo, at different places, people come up and would think it was real. Well, I'm a little freaked out by rattlesnakes myself, but it was all fun and it was amazing. So if you have a character, and let's say that's a wizard, let's say it's a central theme character, have a puppet done, okay? If your budget permits, well, you could hire us to create it. Or doing a mascot. That'll be the best investment because you know what? When we get invited, you know who they're inviting. Story Monster. And I find that, Story Monster is about 6'2" and there are times the real little ones, they can't wait to embrace Story Monster. There are times they're not sure. So I get down as low as I can to be on their level. And sometimes they're not ready. And sometimes they are. But if you have a character, and this goes back to having a phenomenal illustrator, then we take that phenomenal illustrator and we bring that character to life through a puppet. You will never, ever, ever, ever regret that, ever.
And that actually segues into something else that we've been talking about. Jackie and I talk about this all the time. Like I said, I homeschool my kids, and the homeschooling community is huge, and it's a big scene right now, right? And one of the things that we as homeschooling families rely on are book recommendations, So how can we as the homeschooling community connect with the authors?
Several suggestions. This is going to go beyond 2.
Okay, that's fine. Keep going.
Okay. The first thing I want to tell you about, years ago, I was real big on doing co-ops, and I get authors together and I go to a trade program or a convention. Guess what? You're aware they do a homeschool convention, yes? Now I'm going to give you suggestions if you can't afford to do it. I do a co-op. And every author would pay me to participate, whether it's $79 or $150. It depends on, do I have to travel? How far? Do I need a hotel? Do I need to pay to have Story Monster there? You could do your own, okay? I'm going to tell you something. It was a whole new world being at the homeschool convention, okay? So that's something for you to consider. Another idea, when I talked about bringing a character to life, you could have a contest to name one of the characters in your book. And maybe that you credit the person who came up with that name. Maybe you do a contest. This is the teacher in me now. Maybe you do a school contest where the kids draw this character because he's a new character, okay? What are you doing? Now we're going back to STEAM and STEM and bringing in the arts, okay? Whenever you add educational value, when we do a curriculum guide, we bring education value to the classroom. And guess what? The teacher doesn't need to. Yeah, he or she can do their own thing. But I think that that's a huge marketplace. Then here's another idea. I want you to do a Google search for homeschool distributors. I want you to think big. I don't want you to think as, you know what? How can I reach my local homeschool marketplace? No, I want you to go national. Now I'm going to go back to what I've been saying. Make sure you come out with the best possible book. If you cut the wrong corner, you may cut an incredible deal with the distributor. Keep that in mind. And you know what? I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. You make sure that you have a flyer prepared about what you offer to homeschool teachers. Okay, this is part of the media kit idea, okay? You don't have to have a media kit that has 3 or 4 different news releases. No, one news release and multiple pitches. And this is what I'm getting at. One of your pitches is going to focus on homeschoolers. Then you become, I want to say, the queen of homeschoolers. So you want to put a brand on who you are and what you do. Now, I'm going to talk about, when I talk about branding, is it Al Reese? I read a book about 30 years ago called Branding, I think by Al Reese. I want you to think about this. It's funny how one idea has stayed with me all these years. You want to develop a brand, your brand, and there is nothing wrong with focusing on homeschools and be the best homeschooling pro out there, okay? But keep one thing in mind. I use this example. Let's look at Tylenol as an example of brand. I know the word now. Positioning. What you are doing is you are positioning yourself. Your position is going to be homeschooling as an example. Now, Al Reese talked about positioning. I think that's the name of the book, by the way. Positioning. Think about Tylenol. There's Tylenol for I don't even like the word headaches, but there's Tylenol for headaches. There's Tylenol for all different types of conditions. So what are they doing? They are positioning themselves in that marketplace. So when I switched from, my company was 5-Star Publications. Like I said, I did all different types of books, including children's books. About 10 years ago, I repositioned myself to everything children's books. Okay. So when you think of Linda Radke and you think of StoryMonsters, you think everything children's books. So now what is going to be your positioning, your brand, and homeschooling? So now what do you start to do? You start to get endorsements from other homeschoolers. Part of your media kit, a professional picture. If it happens to be a selfie, there's nothing wrong with that. Make sure that things are not cluttered in the background, okay? Homeschooling. Go to a homeschool conference. And I'm going to go back to what you can do for the homeschool conference. Say, I'd be happy to do author talks. I'll bring authors with me. Oh, you know what? You don't have to pay me. I'm happy to do it. And if you give me a small book, that would even be sweeter. Do you hear what I'm saying? Because what are you doing? You're bringing something to them. Now, attracting other authors, what are you doing? You're also helping them get visibility and not being afraid to share the stage.
Right. I love this. This is great advice. I'm like mentally taking notes. What else am I going to do?
You don't have to take notes.
That's true.
Recorded.
It's recorded. No notes needed. All right. I want to be mindful of your time, Linda. So I'm going to ask you one last question. We promise. Thank you for being here with us. Linda, we need your one golden rule, one golden tip for someone who has never published before, but they have a book coming out soon. What is that one tip?
It has always been and remains to be, do it right.
You're saying rely on support, right? Rely on community. Take good advice, but take it to heart.
Well, it's a community that is consisting of a publishing community, and the answer is yes.
That's wonderful.
All right, Linda, you have been such a rock star today. We can't even thank you enough for being here. I'm sure if we were in person, you would be being hugged by both of us, whether it was welcomed or not.
It would be. It would be.
I see the hug through the camera. It's here. It's waiting for you. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for your insights on the science of book launching. There was so much. This was a densely packed episode of advice that people probably have not heard before, particularly if they are new to the game. So you've been fantastic. We're going to encourage all of our listeners to go to our website to find your landing page so that they can click and go right to StoryMonsters to see how StoryMonsters can help them get their book into the hands of people that are actually going to read it and love it.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful.
Linda, you've been fantastic. It's been truly an honor speaking with you, and we're going to take all of your advice to heart. That being said, remember everyone to subscribe to our website for our emails, special events, downloads, insider advice, and we promise there won't be any spam. And be sure to give us a like and a follow on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So thank you so much. It's been truly an honor having you on and having this conversation. And we look forward to continuing this conversation with you. Thank you so much for today.
Very welcome. Thank you.